A True Story by Lucian of Samosata, translated by Austin Morris Harmon. Book 1. Men interested in athletics and in the care of their bodies think not only of condition and exercise, but also of relaxation in season. In fact, they consider this the principal part of training. In like manner, students, I think, after much reading of serious works, may profitably relax their minds and put them in better trim for future labor. It would be appropriate recreation for them if they were to take up the sort of reading that, instead of affording just pure amusement based on wit and humor, also boasts a little food for thought that the muses would not altogether spurn, and I think they will consider the present work something of the kind. They will find it enticing not only for the novelty of its subject, for the humor of its plan, and because I tell all kinds of lies in a plausible and specious way, but also because everything in my story is a more or less comical parody of one or another of the poets, historians, and philosophers of old, who have written much that smacks of miracles and fables. I would cite them by name, were it not that you yourself will recognize them from your reading. One of them is Ctesias, son of Ctesiachus, of Cnidus, who wrote a great deal about India and its characteristics that he had never seen himself nor heard from anyone else with a reputation for truthfulness. Iambulus also wrote much that was strange about the countries in the Great Sea. He made up a falsehood that is patent to everybody, but wrote a story that is not uninteresting for all that. Many others, with the same intent, have written about imaginary travels and journeys of theirs, telling of huge beasts, cruel men, and strange ways of living. Their guide and instructor in this sort of charlatanry is Homer's Odysseus, who tells Alcinous and his court about winds and bondage, one-eyed men, cannibals, and savages, also about animals with many heads, and transformations of his comrades wrought with drugs. This stuff, and much more like it, is what our friend humbugged the illiterate Phaeacians with. Well, on reading all these authors, I did not find much fault with them for their lying, as I saw that this was already a common practice even among men who profess philosophy. I did wonder, though, that they thought that they could write untruths and not get caught at it. Therefore, as I myself, thanks to my vanity, was eager to hand something down to posterity, that I might not be the only one excluded from the privileges of poetic license, and as I had nothing true to tell, not having had any adventures of significance, I took to lying. But my lying is far more honest than theirs. For though I tell the truth in nothing else, I shall at least be truthful in saying that I am a liar. I think I can escape the censure of the world by my own admission that I am not telling a word of truth. Be it understood, then, that when I am writing about things which I have neither seen nor had to do with nor learned from others, which, in fact, do not exist at all and, in the nature of things, cannot exist. Therefore, my readers should on no account believe in them. Once upon a time, setting out from the Pillars of Hercules and heading for the Western Ocean with a fair wind, I went a-voyaging. The motive and purpose of my journey lay in my intellectual activity and desire for adventure, and in my wish to find out what the end of the ocean was, and who the people were that lived on the other side. On this account I put aboard a good store of provisions, stowed water enough, enlisted in the venture 50 of my acquaintances who were like-minded with myself, got together also a great quantity of arms, shipped the best sailing master to be had at a big inducement, and put my boat, she was a pinnace, in trim for a long and difficult voyage. Well, for a day and a night we sailed before the wind without making very much offing, as land was still dimly in sight. But at sunrise on the second day the wind freshened, the sea rose, darkness came on, and before we knew it, we could no longer even get our canvas in. Committing ourselves to the gale and giving up, we drove for 79 days. On the 80th day, however, the sun came out suddenly, and at no great distance we saw a high, wooded island ringed about with sounding surf, which, however, was not rough, as already the worst of the storm was abating. Putting in and going ashore, we lay on the ground for some time in consequence of our long misery. But finally we arose and told off 30 of our number to stay and guard the ship and 20 to go inland with me and look over the island. When we had gone forward through the wood about 3 furlongs from the sea, we saw a slab of bronze, inscribed with Greek letters, faint and obliterated, which said, "To this point came Hercules and Dionysus." There were also 2 footprints in the rock close by, one of which was 100 feet long, the other less. To my thinking, the smaller one was left by Dionysus, the other by Hercules. We did obeisance and went on, but had not gone far when we came upon a river of wine, just as like as could be to Chian. The stream was large and full, so that in places it was actually navigable. Thus, we could not help having much greater faith in the inscription on the slab, seeing the evidence of Dionysus' visit. I resolved to find out where the river took its rise, and went up along the stream. What I found was not a source, but a number of large grapevines, full of clusters. Beside the root of each flowed a spring of clear wine, and the springs gave rise to the river. There were many fish to be seen in it, very similar to wine in color and in taste. In fact, on catching and eating some of them, we became drunk, and when we cut into them, we found them full of lees, of course. Later on, we bethought ourselves to mix with them the other kind of fish, those from the water, and so temper the strength of our edible wine. Next, after crossing the river at a place where it was fordable, we found something wonderful in grapevines. The part which came out of the ground, the trunk itself, was stout and well-grown. But the upper part was in each case a woman, entirely perfect from the waist up. They were like our pictures of Daphne turning into a tree when Apollo is just catching her. Out of their fingertips grew the branches, and they were full of grapes. Actually, the hair of their heads was tendrils and leaves and clusters. When we came up, they welcomed and greeted us, some of them speaking Lydian, some Indian, but the most part Greek. They even kissed us on the lips, and everyone that was kissed at once became reeling drunk. They did not suffer us, however, to gather any of the fruit, but cried out in pain when it was plucked. Some of them actually wanted us to embrace them, and 2 of my comrades complied, but could not get away again. They were held fast by the part which had touched them, for it had grown in and struck root. Already branches had grown from their fingers, tendrils entwined them, and they were on the point of bearing fruit like the others any minute. Leaving them in the lurch, we made off to the boat, and on getting there, told the men we had left behind about everything, including the affair of our comrades with the vines. Then, taking jars, we furnished ourselves not only with water but with wine from the river, encamped for the night on the beach close by, and at daybreak put to sea with a moderate breeze. About noon, when the island was no longer in sight, a whirlwind suddenly arose, spun the boat about, raised her into the air about 300 furlongs, and did not let her down into the sea again, but while she was hung up aloft a wind struck her sails and drove her ahead with bellying canvas. For 7 days and 7 nights we sailed the air, and on the 8th day we saw a great country in it, resembling an island, bright and round and shining with a great light. Running in there and anchoring, we went ashore, and on investigating found that the land was inhabited and cultivated. By day nothing was in sight from the place, but as night came on we began to see many other islands hard by, some larger, some smaller, and they were like fire in color. We also saw another country below, with cities in it and rivers and seas and forests and mountains. This we inferred to be our own world. We determined to go still further inland, but we met what they call the vulture dragoons, and were arrested. These are men riding on large vultures and using the birds for horses. The vultures are large and for the most part have 3 heads. You can judge of their size from the fact that the mast of a large merchantman is not so long or so thick as the smallest of the quills they have. The vulture dragoons are commissioned to fly about the country and bring before the king any stranger they may find, so of course they arrested us and brought us before him. When he had looked us over and drawn his conclusions from our clothes, he said, "Then you are Greeks, are you? Strangers?" And when we assented, "Well, how did you get here, with so much air to cross?" We told him all, and he began and told us about himself, that he too was a human being, Endymion by name, who had once been ravished from our country in his sleep, and on coming there had been made king of the land. He said that his country was the moon that shines down on us. He urged us to take heart, however, and suspect no danger, for we should have everything that we required. And if I succeed, said he, in the war, which I am now making on the people of the sun, you shall lead the happiest of lives with me. We asked who the enemy were, and what the quarrel was about. Phaeton, said he, the king of the inhabitants of the sun, for it is inhabited, you know, as well as the moon, has been at war with us for a long time now. It began in this way. Once upon a time I gathered together the poorest people in my kingdom and undertook to plant a colony on the morning star, which was empty and uninhabited. Phaeton, out of jealousy, thwarted the colonization, meeting us halfway at the head of his ant dragoons. At that time we were beaten, for we were not a match for them in strength, and we retreated. Now, however, I desire to make war again and plant the colony. If you wish, then, you may take part with me in the expedition, and I will give each of you one of my royal vultures and a complete outfit. We shall take the field tomorrow. Very well, said I, since you think it best. That night we stopped there as his guests, but at daybreak we arose and took our posts. For the scouts signaled that the enemy was near. The number of our army was 100,000, apart from the porters, the engineers, the infantry, and the foreign allies. Of this total, 80,000 were vulture dragoons and 20,000 grass plume riders. The grass plume is also a very large bird, which instead of plumage is all shaggy with grass and has wings very like lettuce leaves. Next to these the millet shooters and the garlic fighters were posted. Endymion also had allies who came from the Great Bear, 30,000 flea archers and 50,000 volplaneurs. The flea archers ride on great fleas, from which they get their name. The fleas are as large as 12 elephants. The volplaneurs are infantry, to be sure, but they fly in the air without wings. As to the manner of their flight, they pull their long tunics up through their girdles, let the baggy folds fill with wind as if they were sails, and are carried along like boats. For the most part they serve as light infantry in battle. It was said, too, that the stars over Cappadocia would send 70,000 sparrowcorns and 5,000 crane dragoons. I did not get a look at them, as they did not come, so I have not ventured to write about their characteristics, for the stories about them were wonderful and incredible. These were the forces of Endymion. They all had the same equipment, helmets of beans. Their beans are large and tough, scale corslets of lupins. They sew together the skins of lupins to make the corslets, and in that country the skin of the lupin is unbreakable, like horn. Shields and swords of the Greek pattern. When the time came, they took position thus: on the right wing, the vulture dragoons and the king, with the bravest about him, we were among them; on the left, the grass plumes; in the center, the allies, in whatever formation they liked. The infantry came to about 60 million, and was deployed as follows. Spiders in that country are numerous and large, all of them far larger than the Cyclades Islands. They were commissioned by the king to span the air between the moon and the morning star with a web. And as soon as they had finished and had made a plain, he deployed his infantry on it. Their leaders were Owlet son of Fairweather, and 2 others. As to the enemy, on the left were the ant dragoons, with whom was Phaeton. They are very large beasts with wings, like the ants that we have, except in size. The largest one was 200 feet long. They themselves fought, as well as their riders, and made especially good use of their feelers. They were said to number about 50,000. On their right were posted the sky mosquitoes, numbering also about 50,000, all archers riding on large mosquitoes. Next to them were the sky dancers, a sort of light infantry, formidable however, like all the rest, for they slung radishes at long range, and any man that they hit could not hold out a moment, but died. And his wound was malodorous. They were said to anoint their missiles with mallow poison. Beside them were posted the stock mushrooms, heavy infantry employed at close quarters, 10,000 in number. They had the name stock mushrooms, because they used mushrooms for shields and stalks of asparagus for spears. Near them stood the puppycorns, who were sent him by the inhabitants of the Dog Star, 5,000 dog-faced men who fight on the back of winged acorns. It was said that there were tardy allies in Phaeton's case, too, the slingers whom he had summoned from the Milky Way, and the cloud centaurs. The latter, to be sure, arrived just after the battle was over, if only they had not, but the slingers did not put in an appearance at all. On account of this, they say, Phaeton was furious with them and afterwards ravaged their country with fire. This, then, was the array with which Phaeton came on. Joining battle when the flags had been flown and the donkeys on both sides had brayed, for they had donkeys for trumpeters. They fought. The left wing of the Sunnites fled at once, without even receiving the charge of the vulture horse, and we pursued, cutting them down. But their right wing got the better of the left on our side, and the sky mosquitoes advanced in pursuit right up to the infantry. Then, when the infantry came to the rescue, they broke and fled, especially as they saw that the forces on their left had been defeated. It was a glorious victory, in which many were taken alive and many were slain. So much blood flowed on the clouds that they were dyed and looked red, as they do in our country when the sun is setting, and so much also dripped down on the earth that I wonder whether something of the sort did not take place in the sky long ago, when Homer supposed that Zeus had sent a rain of blood on account of the death of Sarpedon. When we had returned from the pursuit, we set up 2 trophies, one on the spider webs for the infantry battle and the other, for the sky battle, on the clouds. We were just doing this when the scouts reported that the cloud centaurs, who should have come to Phaeton's aid before the battle, were advancing on us. Before we knew it, they were coming on in plain sight, a most unparalleled spectacle, being a combination of winged horses and men. In size, the men were as large as the Colossus of Rhodes from the waist up, and the horses were as large as a great merchantman. Their number, however, one leave unrecorded for fear that someone may think it incredible, it was so great. Their leader was the archer from the zodiac. When they saw that their friends had been defeated, they sent word to Phaeton to advance again, and then, on their own account, in regular formation fell on the disordered Munnites, who had broken ranks and scattered to pursue and to plunder. They put them all to flight, pursued the king himself to the city and killed most of his birds. They plucked up the trophies and overran the whole plain woven by the spiders. And they captured me with 2 of my comrades. By this time Phaeton too was present, and other trophies were being set up by their side. As for us, we were taken off to the sun that day, our hands tied behind our backs with a section of spider web. The enemy decided not to lay siege to the city, but on their way back they built a wall through the air, so that the rays of the sun should no longer reach the moon. The wall was double, made of cloud, so that a genuine eclipse of the moon took place. And she was completely enshrouded in unbroken night. Hard pressed by this, Endymion sent and begged them to pull down the construction and not let them lead their lives in darkness. He promised to pay tribute, to be an ally and not to make war again, and volunteered to give hostages for all this. Phaeton and his people held 2 assemblies. On the first day they did not lay aside a particle of their anger, but on the second day they softened, and the peace was made on these terms. On the following conditions the Sunnites and their allies make peace with the Munnites and their allies, to wit, that the Sunnites tear down the dividing wall and do not invade the moon again, and that they make over the prisoners of war, each at a set ransom. That the Munnites permit the stars to be autonomous, and do not make war on the Sunnites. That each country aids the other if it be attacked. That in yearly tribute the king of the Munnites pay the king of the Sunnites 10,000 gallons of dew. And that he gives 10,000 of his people as hostages. That the colony on the morning star be planted in common, and that anyone else who so desires may take part in it. That the treaty be inscribed on a slab of electrum and set up in mid-air, on the common confines. Attested underhand and seal. For the Sunnites: Firebrace, Parcher, Burns. For the Munnites: Darkling, Mooney, Albright. On those terms peace was made, and then the wall was torn down at once and we prisoners were restored. When we reached the moon, we were met and tearfully welcomed by our comrades and by Endymion himself. He wanted me to stay with him and join the colony, promising to give me his own son in marriage. There are no women in their country. But I was not to be persuaded. I asked him to let me go down to the sea. When he perceived that he could not prevail on me, he let us go after entertaining us for 7 days. In the interval, while I was living on the moon, I observed some strange and wonderful things that I wish to speak of. In the first place, there is the fact that they are not born of women but of men. They marry men and do not even know the word woman at all. Up to the age of 25 each is a wife, and thereafter a husband. They carry their children in the calf of the leg instead of the belly. When conception takes place, the calf begins to swell. In course of time, they cut it open and deliver the child dead, and then they bring it to life by putting it in the wind with its mouth open. It seems to me that the belly of the leg came to us Greeks from there, since the leg performs the function of a belly with them. But I will tell you something else, still more wonderful. They have a kind of men whom they call the arboreals, who are brought into the world as follows: excepting a man's right genital gland, they plant it in the ground. From it grows a very large tree of flesh, resembling the emblem of Priapus. It has branches and leaves, and its fruit is acorns a cubit thick. When these ripen, they harvest them and shell out the men. Another thing, they have artificial parts that are sometimes of ivory and sometimes with the poor, of wood, and make use of them in their intercourse. When a man grows old, he does not die, but is dissolved like smoke and turns into air. They all eat the same food, they light a fire and cook frogs on the coals. They have quantities of frogs that fly about in the air, and while they are cooking, they sit about them as if at table, snuff up the rising smoke and gorge themselves. This is the food they eat, and their drink is air, which is squeezed into a cup and yields a liquid like dew. They are not subject to calls of nature, which, in fact, they have no means of answering. Another important function, too, is not provided for as one would expect, but in the hollow of the knee. A man is thought beautiful in that country if he is bald and hairless, and they quite detest long-haired people. It is different on the comets, where they think long-haired people beautiful. There were visitors in the moon who told us about them. Another point, they have beards that grow a little above the knee, and they have no toenails, but are all single-toed. Over each man's rump grows a long cabbage leaf, like a tail, which is always green and does not break if he falls on his back. Their noses run honey of great pungency, and when they work or take exercise, they sweat milk all over their bodies, of such quality that cheese can actually be made from it by dripping in a little of the honey. They make oil from onions, and it is very clear and sweet-smelling, like myrrh. They have many water vines, the grapes of which are like hailstones, and to my thinking, the hail that falls down on us is due to the bursting of the bunches when a wind strikes and shakes those vines. They use their bellies for pockets, putting into them anything they have use for, as they can open and shut them. These parts do not seem to have any intestines in them or anything else, except that they are all shaggy and hairy inside, so that the children enter them when it is cold. The clothing of the rich is malleable glass, and that of the poor, spun bronze, for that region is rich in bronze, which they work like wool, by wetting it with water. I am reluctant to tell you what sort of eyes they have, for fear that you may think me lying on account of the incredibility of the story, but I will tell you, notwithstanding. The eyes that they have are removable. And whenever they they take them out and put them away until they want to see, then they put them in and look. Many, on losing their own, borrow other people's to see with, and the rich folk keep a quantity stored up. For ears they have plain leaves, except only the acorn men, who have wooden ones. In the royal purlieus I saw another marvel. A large looking-glass is fixed above a well, which is not very deep. If a man goes down into the well, he hears everything that is said among us on earth. And if he looks into the looking-glass he sees every city and every country just as if he were standing over it. When I tried it I saw my family and my whole native land, but I cannot go further and say for certain whether they also saw me. Anyone who does not believe this is so will find, if ever he gets there himself, that I am telling the truth. To go back to my story, we embraced the king and his friends, went aboard, and put off. Endymion even gave me presents, 2 of the glass tunics, 5 of bronze, and a suit of lupin armor, but I left them all behind in the whale. He also sent 1,000 vulture dragoons with us to escort us for 60 miles. On our way, we passed many countries and put in at the Morning Star, which was just being colonized. We landed there and procured water. Going aboard and making for the Zodiac, we passed the Sun to port. Hugging the shore. We did not land, though many of my comrades wanted to, for the wind was unfavorable. But we saw that the country was green and fertile and well-watered, and full of untold good things. On seeing us, the cloud centaurs, who had entered the service of Phaeton, flew up to the ship and then went away again when they found out that the treaty protected us. The vulture dragoons had already left us. Sailing the next night and day, we reached Lamptown toward evening, already being on our downward way. This city lies in the air midway between the Pleiades and the Hyades, though much lower than the Zodiac. On landing, we did not find any men at all, but a lot of lamps running about and loitering in the public square and at the harbor. Some of them were small and poor, so to speak, a few, being great and powerful, were very splendid and conspicuous. Each of them has his own house, or sconce, they have names like men, and we heard them talking. They offered us no harm, but invited us to be their guests. We were afraid, however, and none of us ventured to eat a mouthful or close an eye. They have a public building in the center of the city, where their magistrate sits all night and calls each of them by name, and whoever does not answer is sentenced to death for deserting. They are executed by being put out. We were at court, saw what went on, and heard the lamps defend themselves and tell why they came late. There I recognized our own lamp. I spoke to him and inquired how things were at home, and he told me all about them. That night we stopped there. But on the next day we set sail and continued our voyage. By this time we were near the clouds. There we saw the city of Cloud Cuckoo Town, and wondered at it, but did not visit it, as the wind did not permit. The king, however, was said to be Crow Dawson. It made me think of Aristophanes the poet, a wise and truthful man whose writings are distrusted without reason. On the next day but one, the ocean was already in plain sight, but no land anywhere except the countries in the air, and they began to appear fiery and bright. Toward noon on the 4th day, the wind fell gently and gave out, and we were set down on the sea. When we touched the water we were marvelously pleased and happy, made as merry as we could in every way, and went over the side for a swim, for by good luck it was calm and the sea was smooth. It would seem, however, that a change for the better often proves a prelude to greater ills. We had sailed just 2 days in fair weather, and the 3rd day was breaking when towards sunrise we suddenly saw a number of sea monsters, whales. One among them, the largest of all, was fully 150 miles long. He came at us with open mouth, dashing up the sea far in advance, foam-washed, showing teeth much larger than the emblems of Dionysus in our country, and all sharp as calthrops and white as ivory. We said goodbye to one another, embraced, and waited. He was there in an instant, and with a gulp swallowed us down, ship and all. He just missed crushing us with his teeth, but the boat slipped through the gaps between them into the interior. When we were inside, it was dark at first, and we could not see anything, but afterwards, when he opened his mouth, we saw a great cavity, flat all over and high, and large enough for the housing of a great city. In it there were fish, large and small, and many other creatures all mangled, ship's rigging and anchors, human bones, and merchandise. In the middle there was land with hills on it, which to my thinking was formed of the mud that he had swallowed. Indeed, a forest of all kinds of trees had grown on it, garden stuff had come up, and everything appeared to be under cultivation. The coast of the island was 27 miles long. Seabirds were to be seen nesting on the trees, gulls and kingfishers. At first, we shed tears for a long time, and then I roused my comrades, and we provided for the ship by shoring it up and for ourselves by rubbing sticks together. lighting a fire and getting dinner as best we could. We had at hand plenty of fish of all kinds, and we still had the water from the morning star. On rising the next day, whenever the whale opened his mouth, we saw mountains one moment, nothing but sky the next, and islands frequently. And we perceived by this that he was rushing swiftly to all parts of the sea. When we finally tired of this pastime, I took 7 of my comrades and went into the forest, wishing to have a look everything. I had not yet gone quite 5 furlongs when I found a temple of Poseidon, as the inscription indicated, and not far from it a number of graves with stones on them. Nearby was a spring of clear water. We also heard the barking of a dog, smoke appeared in the distance, and we made out something like a farmhouse, too. Advancing eagerly, we came upon an old man and a boy very busily at work in a garden which they were irrigating with water from the spring. Joyful and fearful at the same instant, we stopped still, and they too, probably feeling the same as we, stood there without a word. In course of time the old man said, "Who are you, strangers? Are you sea gods, or only unlucky men like us? As for ourselves, though we are men and were bred on land, we have become sea creatures and swim about with this beast which encompasses us. Not even knowing for certain what our condition is, we suppose that we are dead, but trust that we are alive." To this I replied, "We too are men, my good sir, newcomers, who were swallowed up yesterday, ship and all, and we set out just now with the notion of finding out how things were in the forest, for it appeared to be very large and thick. But, some divinity, it seems, brought us to see you and to discover that we are not the only people shut up in this animal. Do tell us your adventures, who you are and how you got in here." But he said he would neither tell us nor question us before giving us what entertainment he could command, and he took us with him to the house. It was a commodious structure, had bunks built in it and was fully furnished in other ways. He set before us vegetables, fruit and fish and poured us out wine as well. When we had had enough, he asked us what had happened to us. I told him about everything from first to last, the storm, the island, the cruise in the air, the war and all the rest of it up to our descent into the whale. He expressed huge wonder, and then told us his own story, saying, "By birth, strangers, I am a Cypriot, setting out from my native land on a trading venture with my boy whom you see, and with many servants besides. I began a voyage to Italy, bringing various wares on a great ship, which you no doubt saw wrecked in the mouth of the whale. As far as Sicily we had a fortunate voyage, but there we were caught by a violent wind and driven out into the ocean for 3 days, where we fell in with the whale. Were swallowed up crew and all, and only we 2 survived, the others being killed. We buried our comrades, built a temple to Poseidon and lived this sort of life, raising vegetables and eating fish and nuts. As you see, the forest is extensive, and besides, it contains many grapevines, which yield the sweetest of wine. No doubt you noticed the spring of beautiful cold water, too. We make our bed of leaves, burn all the wood we want, snare the birds that fly in, and catch fish by going into the gills of the animal. We also bathe there when we care to. Another thing. There is a lake not far off, 20 furlongs in circumference, with all kinds of fish in it, where we swim and sail in a little skiff that I made. It is now 27 years since we were swallowed. Everything else is perhaps endurable, but our neighbors and fellow countrymen are extremely quarrelsome and unpleasant, being unsociable and savage. What, said I, are there other people in the whale, too? Why, yes, lots of them, said he, they are unfriendly and are oddly built. In the western part of the forest, the tail part, live the broilers and eel-eyed, lobster-faced people that are warlike and bold, and are cannibals. On one side, by the starboard wall, live the maregoats, like men above and catfish below, they are not so wicked as the others. To port there are the crabclaws and the codheads, who are friends and allies with each other. The interior is inhabited by clan crawfish and the sole feet, good fighters and swift runners. The eastern part, that near the mouth, is mostly uninhabited, as it is subject to inundations of the sea. I live in it, however. Paying the Sulfite a tribute of 500 oysters a year. Such being the nature of the country, it is for you to see how we can fight with all these tribes, and how we are to get a living. How many are there of them in all? Said I. More than 1,000, said he. What sort of weapons have they? Nothing but fishbones, he said. Then our best plan, said I, would be to meet them in battle, as they are unarmed and we have arms. If we defeat them, we shall live here in peace the rest of our days. This was resolved on. And we went to the boat and made ready. The cause of war was to be the withholding of the tribute, since the date for it had already arrived. They sent and demanded the tax, and he gave the messengers a contemptuous answer and drove them off. First the Sulfite and Clan Crawfish, incensed at Cyntharus, for that was his name, came on with a great uproar. Anticipating their attack, we were waiting under arms, having previously posted in our front a squad of 25 men in ambush, who had been directed to fall on the enemy when they saw that they had gone by. And this they did. Falling on them in the rear, they cut them down, while we ourselves, 25 in number, for Cyntharus and his son were in our ranks, met them face to face and, engaging them, ran our hazard with strength and spirit. Finally, we routed them and pursued them clear to their dens. The slain on the side of the enemy were 170 foot, on our side, one, the sailing master, who was run through the midriff with a mullet rib. That day and night we bivouacked on the field and made a trophy by setting up the dry spine of a dolphin. On the following day the others, who had heard of it, appeared, with the broilers, led by Tom Cod, on the right wing, the cod heads on the left, and the crab claws in the center. The maregoats did not take the field, choosing not to ally themselves with either party. Going out to meet them, we engaged them by the temple of Poseidon with great shouting, and the hollow re-echoed like a cave. Routing them, as they were light-armed, and pursuing them into the forest. We were thenceforth masters of the land. Not long afterwards, they sent heralds and were for recovering their dead and conferring about an alliance, but we did not think it best to make terms with them. Indeed, on the following day we marched against them and utterly exterminated them. All but the maregoats, and they, when they saw what was doing, ran off through the gills and threw themselves into the sea. Occupying the country, which was now clear of the enemy, we dwelt there in peace from that time on, constantly engaging in sports, hunting, tending vines and gathering the fruit of the trees. In short, we resembled men leading a life of luxury and roaming at large in a great prison that they cannot break out of. For a year and 8 months we lived in this way, but on the 5th day of the 9th month, about the second mouth opening, for the whale did it once an hour, so that we told time by the openings, about the second opening, as I said, much shouting and commotion suddenly made itself heard. And what seemed to be commands and or beats. Excitedly we crept up to the very mouth of the animal, and standing inside the teeth we saw the most unparalleled of all the sights that ever I saw, huge men, fully half a furlong in stature, sailing on huge islands as on galleys. Though I know that what I am going to recount savors of the incredible, I shall say it nevertheless. There were islands, long but not very high, and fully 100 furlongs in circumference, on each of which about 120 of those men were cruising, some of whom, sitting along each side of the island one behind the other, were rowing with huge cypress trees for oars, branches, leaves, and all. Aft at the stern, as I suppose you would call it, stood the master on a high hill, holding a bronze tiller 5 furlongs in length. At the bow, about 40 of them under arms were fighting. They were like men in all but their hair, which was fire and blazed up, so that they had no need of plumes. In lieu of sails, the wind struck the forest, which was dense on each of the islands, filled this and carried the island wherever the helmsman would. There were boatswains in command, to keep the oarsmen in time, and the islands moved swiftly under the rowing, like war galleys. At first we only saw 2 or 3, but later on about 600 made their appearance. Taking sides, they went to war and had a sea fight. Many collided with one another bows on, and many were rammed amidships and sunk. Some, grappling one another, put up a stout fight and were slow to cast off. For those stationed at the bows showed all zeal in boarding and slaying, no quarter was given. Instead of iron grapnels, they threw aboard one another great devil fish with lines belayed to them, and these gripped the woods and held the island fast. They struck and wounded one another with oysters that would fill a wagon and with 100-foot sponges. The leader of one side was Aeolo Centaur, of the other, Brine Drinker. Their battle evidently came about on account of an act of piracy. Brine Drinker was said to have driven off many herds of dolphins belonging to Aeolo Centaur. We knew this because we could hear them abusing one another and calling out the names of their kings. Finally, the side of Aeolo Centaur won. They sank about 150 of the enemy's islands, and took 3 more, crews and all. The rest backed water and fled. After pursuing them some distance, they turned back to the wrecks at evening, making prizes of most of them and picking up what belonged to themselves, for on their own side not less than 80 islands had gone down. They also made a trophy of the isle fight by setting up one of the enemy's islands on the head of the whale. That night they slept on shipboard around the animal, making their shore lines fast to him and riding at anchor just off him, for they had anchors, large and strong, made of glass. On the following day, they performed sacrifice on the whale, buried their friends on him, and sailed off rejoicing and apparently singing hymns of victory. So much for the events of the isle fight.